I'm going to jump on and just randomly start working on things. So this time around I'm working on some terrain blend gradients. I'm just kind of experimenting. You'll sort of see me jump between different tools, but right now I'm working with Texture Maker, Infinity Textures. This is a weird process because there are a whole bunch of these little pieces. I'll kind of explain what's going on here. But inside this program, there's this cool little tool called Neighbor Texture Transitions. And as it looks, it's a 9-tile autotile creation tool thing. And I tend to use it just to make these cool blending gradients, and you can change how gross it looks or how noisy it is. You can set some smoothing values or how sharp the detail is. I'm keeping it about 100 right now for both of those. And then there's a radius which you can change, but I'm keeping it at about 98. I don't want it to be too big, so it spreads out to the edges. But once it's done creating these, it splits them all into little bitty bits. So I've got to use this weird little feature that comes with the program as well called Link with Source. There's a whole bunch of little, I guess they're called functions. All of these are called functions, and there's a whole bunch of them for working with textures and making things seamless. And one of them is called Link with Source, and all this does is it connects these pictures or connects these images to each other, and you have to create a source or click a source here which will actually mark this texture as the source texture, and then when you apply the function to another one, it will connect the two together. So the source will be placed on the right or the left or bottom or top or wherever. So that's useful for connecting things together when they're split into little tiny pieces. This looks messy, but I've worked with it a lot, so I'm pretty used to it by now. So now I've got these two pieces and this bottom piece here. I've still got my 3 top parts. So I'm going to start with the middle one and link those together. I don't need either of these anymore. And then I'll link these together. So I don't need these anymore. And I end up with this big row of bars and all these windows open. Excuse me. But eventually it starts to look cleaner. So there's some other, actually I might need those. I'll link those together later, but right now I'll make sure those are minimized first. I want to do the same thing and link all 3 of these together. So now I've got this one here and this one here. I actually don't need any of these 3, so I can just close out of those. Now I've got this blob. I want to save that blob over this blob. Doesn't have a name yet. I'm not using that right now. Let's kill these. These were part of a failed experiment. So I went back to my trusty normal method using this neighboring tiles tool. Pretty neat, super useful for me. Where did my... oh, that got squished underneath the everything. Okay, so once I've got this blob, this noisy blob, over here in the World Creator, sadly, which is totally unavailable, but I will always be releasing stuff that I make with these tools so you can use them in your own projects. And one of them is this cool terrain blending feature that comes with it. Normally it's for applying shading and stuff, but you can also blend textures with this. There's this little blend textures option, and if I have all these little boxes ticked, it applies the darkness and lightness values of this mask to the textures. But right now, if I just click it, it's going to give me this cool little grass and dirt blend, which I don't necessarily need, don't necessarily need the shading, because the way I've got it set up kind of gives me this jagged edge anyway. I'm using this second texture here. So I've got these two textures I can use. And really, this is mostly a way for me to blend between three textures. If I want to try, I don't know, blending sand into dirt or whatever, I can actually toss that in there. It doesn't always look amazing, but sometimes when I try the different lighting settings, I can get it to blend better. And even that's not perfect. But there are some things that I can do to my masks. This is a fun program. I wish I could, I don't know, I wish I could share it with people. Or I wish more people got to experience it. This drag and drop architecture is really interesting. Pretty much every window you can drag and drop stuff in and out of. Like, you can just drag and drop all of these to make backups of your textures. You can scooch things into the world viewer. You can drag and drop anything. And there's this cool little effects toolbox. Getting sick. This cool little effects toolbox comes with all these weird old school effects, from swirling to shaking. There's some that it's hard to see unless you really increase the values, but there are different types of ripples and melts, and they're really things that you can find in something like Gmake for GIMP or Image Magic. Those are some tools that you can use that have very similar stuff. There's a lot of these old school type effects, but the one I want to use, so I'm going to restart this. I just want to kind of blur it a little bit. Doesn't have to be much, but more than it is. So I'll get rid of this one here. My original's kind of noisy, but the blurred one has a little bit more softening, so I'll scooch that in there. It's not going to look much better with the lighting on there. And the textures sometimes aren't really good for blending together, so I actually have to choose my textures wisely sometimes. Anything that I'm blending together, I would like them to match more, which I should have put here and this one here. Kind of gives this shadow to the grass, but still not quite what I want. And in the end, it's a lot of trial and error, testing different things. It looks kind of like dryish grass with some sand underneath. That's one of the better looking ones. These two mixes. This one's a little bit noisier because it's using a noisier texture or noisier mask. So it's nice to have this window here because I can actually move things around, line things up, and it's cool to look at just the stages sometimes, so I can keep track of what I've been doing or what I had worked on earlier. Like this less noisy, or the more noisy mask looks more jagged, and this blurred, softened mask looks less jagged. So those textures are a little bit big. I think part of what I did here, there's a limit to how small this neighbor texture transitions dialog box, this whatever it's called, this little feature here, it created a series that was bigger than what I need. I need 32 by 32 pixel tiles, and it can only create 64 by 64, so I have to actually shrink everything down. But I actually want this to be 96. And that's actually really tiny, surprisingly. Surprisingly tiny. I'm going to save that as 96 by 96. So it's super tiny, incredibly tiny, dumb tiny. Itty bitty bitty. Now, all of these aren't going to be the textures that I'm using, but just to experiment, test some lighting and coloring, I'll resize these. as long as they're the same size as the tiles that I'm aiming at, once I do a render, it'll actually duplicate these. It'll auto tile them in a grid, so it'll just place 3. It's hard to explain. It'll actually do duplicates all across the surface of this mask, so wherever I have a 32 by 32 texture, it's going to be duplicated across in a 3 by 3 grid. And to explain that better, I must render it. So now you can kind of see where the texture repeats across the top and the sides. You can see the dark spot here in the sand, so it repeats across the surface 3 times. That's the basic, I guess, terrain ground tile right there. So I'm actually going to try several different blends. I really just want to make some placeholder tiles for the Land Rover mode, and I'm currently just using some ugly hand-drawn MS Paint style doo-doo, and I don't want to use that. So back over in Texture Maker, I said I want to use these. These are my concave pieces, and these are the corner bits, the inner corner, and they actually, this is harder to assemble. I'm going to need to use this tile middle. I'm going to need all 4 of these corners, which will be corner, corner, will basically be corner, middle, corner. And then I need another one of these. Technically I don't, but just for visual sake, to assemble this. Oops. Doot. And then I've got my top corner here. There's just going to be another one of these in the middle. So I want to start all over again here with my source on the right. Link with source. Now I've got my bottom piece. I've got my bottom half. I don't need that anymore. Get rid of that. Now I do the same thing with the middle. Source, link, loop, and we'll source, link those, loop, loop, and same story here. Source, link, zoom to 1, and source, link those. So now I've got all 3 rows that I need. I just do the same thing again. Keep the source on the bottom, link those together, make that the source, link those together. Now I've got my concave piece, and like the other one, I want to rescale it to 96. So I've got this little bitty guy here. And mask concave 96, 96. Keep opening the wrong one. I'm not using that right now. So go back over here. I'll open that. Grab my other teeny tiny mask, which is right here. It's going to look really weird, but that's okay, because that's what I want. I want this weird shape. Now this is like, I don't know, an old school classic type of auto tiling, and it's built into 001 Game Creator, which I can show off at least. It may work the first time. I may have to do some fiddling, but whenever you work with the tile sets, you can actually add a terraformation graphic when you're working with a ground layer tile. This is the type of tile that is on the very bottom. It's usually used for terrain, grass, ground, whatever, pathways, anything the player is going to stand on, walk on, drive over. It's not considered a 3D model. You can't import a 3D model as a ground tile. It's just a flat graphic. So where you add a terraformation graphic here, change the number to 1, And open that up, and you see these two layers, or two sections, I guess, concave and convex. And back over here, Texture Maker, you can see these shapes here. We've got these inner and outer corners, and that's basically what's going to go here. You can plop them in there one by one. Usually I make them as a whole, just because it's easier to import in 001. You can actually right click on this big square here and replace with, I think it's any size really, as long as it's a multiple of 2. So if your tiles are 64 by 64, you can also import, what did that just say? 96, 96. And the basic size is 96 by 96, but anything bigger than that has to be a multiple of 2. And since I'm not doing that right now, I'll just show importing one of these. So I want to keep these 3 textures here as backups of my original textures. And I use one of these texture windows to save it. So I've got a grass concave. Actually, I think that's a convex. No, that's a concave. And then grass convex. I always forget grass convex. So I'm going to test this out and import my concave and my convex. And that should fill these in here. But the center tile here is incorrect. In 001, you actually have to go in and bring copies of these 4 corners to the center. That's easiest to do by just selecting it. You can drag these in. Actually, I wanted to copy that. Selecting that, copying that. Doing the same for these bottom 4. And then you just drag these into the center here. So it doesn't actually give me the gradient for that. I could, I believe, just assemble the gradient that that would look like this. I have to do that by hand, but once you do that, that'll fix the corners here. Everything looks nicer. There's still something weird there. I didn't see what that was. So, since there's no ground tile yet, you gotta actually grab this, go out here, and paste that in there. That'll give you the tile that fills in the centers. And sometimes that doesn't work right when you... the terraformation things in 001 is kind of strange. So if I don't have the terraformation set up right, it doesn't always... sometimes you have to change it to overlay inside, overlay outside to get it to properly do corners. But since I don't have any neighboring tiles, it's not going to draw right now. So I want to go over here and actually replace that with this little guy. It's just going to be grass tile. And come over here, grab the grass tile, and over here change the neighboring tile to this grass tile. So now we have working terraformation. It does this sometimes. You actually have to use the center graphic here as well, because this is covered by this tile. So you go in here, and we're just going to repeat the process from the concave tile, or I mean the convex tile, but instead of copying these inner corners, to copy the outer corners and bring those into the center. Which in this case isn't very great. There's not much dirt. There's not much dirt in the center. Kind of a little bit of dirt. But that center tile needs to look like that. It needs to be the outer corners of these 4 tiles. So now that actually fixes all the issues with the corner drawing, but it's hard to see if it's just a dot Very tiny. Could increase that, just adding some more of these around, but for now that's kind of fine. I might actually fiddle with the borders and my gradients at some point, but there's pretty decent little terraform. And now I can come back into the map and replace some tiles and see what it looks like. Bloop. It's going to look terrible right now because I've got these other placeholder tiles, but now whenever you draw on this grass, you get this nice kind of shaded terraform, or auto tiling. I think it's called auto tiling in some other programs like RPG Maker, Game Maker, but it's still called terraforming to me because it's terrain. So you can do some nice shading, cool color blending, and there's some other stuff I could probably do. I don't want it to look that dark, but there's some adjustments that I could make to this gradient. I think over here in Texture Maker I'd have to remake my masks, or create some selection masks to actually cover up these light gray areas. The way that I would have to adjust it is kind of tedious, so I might actually make them over again. But that's how I'd get a nice little road or pathway to look semi-decent. There's some shading on the edges, and it doesn't look bad. This is mostly prototyping for the ground team, and putting together these tile sets is going to take a while because I want a few different environments. I want to actually test out a few different styles. This is just some grass and dirt, and I can actually go into my volcanic textures. Some of these are a bit more detailed than I want them to be, but I'd actually need all of these to be 32, so I just got these little gray textures, and I can mix them with some lava stones or a little bit red. Probably don't want that shading on right now. Let's see what that looks like. So go back, grab one of my convex masks here. Kind of did that backwards. I want the ground to be on the inside. I can actually make these two the same. I can turn on the lighting or the shading, give it some more depth. I don't have to do it that way, but I can do some other tricks to add lava, but I want these to be tiled too, so 32 by 32. A little bit nicer. I don't have any of my newer lava textures in here. That'd be more like that, kind of blending these textures, or blending stones and rocky textures, rocky terrain. The way that's set up right now is it would actually make things dark if I use my lighting or the luminance. These are called luminance ticks, or luminosity ticks, which everything in this program seems to have its own custom terminology that I can't really find anywhere else. So I'm a bit confused sometimes trying to translate techniques from this program to Photoshop or GIMP, because they don't use the same terminology, and it's just really old at this point. I could create these different texture blends here. I might actually take a look at some of my other textures, because I'd like to create mostly just barriers and terrain for the terrain vehicle to explore. So there will be like walls and rocks and stuff, but pathways that you can follow. And the original version of the project had 3D stuff, and now I'm not working with 3D. I would like to do it all in 2D, so having a top-down perspective with these types of tiles I feel like would be an improvement. It might not work with such small tiles, but I'd also have to increase my zoom level if I want to use bigger tiles, I think. Decrease. I can import tiles bigger than this size, but for now I'm just going to stick with the 96, or the 32 by 32, so I can use these 96 by 96 masks. With, let's see, there's a few different kinds of blends I want to try, because ultimately I'll have to make one for each terrain blending into a different terrain. So it'd basically be sand to grass and grass to water, water to mud or whatever, so I can actually create these environments. And there's going to be, I want to do blends for volcanic environments, and then I have some more acidic type methane or methane planets. And a lot of terrain and even some stuff like farms or ruins. But those will probably be their own type of tiles. So for blending different types of terrain, let me try a couple of these lunar textures. I have to resize everything. All my textures default 128 by 128. If I wanted to tile across the surface of this, I need it to be 3232. And of course, that's an ugly thing. What kind of texture am I trying to make for this planet? Give it kind of a lighter, gross texture there. Trying to look absurd. Yeah, it does. Colorize that. No. Lighting that looks terrible too. So that's not a good choice. I'll try a slightly different, no, that's even worse. Just a slightly darker gray maybe. Those blend in pretty nice. I'll have to make a couple different types with less or more or less noise. And then I definitely want to try a few different methods of blending these together, because you can use the neighboring tile transitions here, but it's fixed. It's basically smooth or not smooth, and there's no seed, so you can't change the style of the noise around the edge, which is unfortunate. But you can change how wide it is. You can change how small it is. It gets kind of weird if you turn it all the way down, but it's not usable at 200. But pretty much anything over 120 starts to cross into the edges and gets not usable, because you don't want anything across the edges. You need the edges to be flat all the way across. So back over here, I'm going to bring in the bigger mask. Actually, I've got the bigger mask right here. Don't know what I'm doing. Let me drag a copy of that in here. Bring that guy up there. I'll grab another copy of the other half of that. Where'd it go? And I've got the bigger version of that, I believe. Did I save that? I didn't save that. So that's a 288. I'll just go ahead and save the 288. Concave left 2. Dun, dun, dun. I have a copy of that. Dun, dun, dun. And move this out of the way. Oh, I did that weird. Did that super weird. These are not correct. Was I using that dirt? I already forget if I was using that dirt texture. I don't think I was using that dirt texture. No, I was using a grass texture. Da-da-da-da. Wasn't that one, it was my dry grass. There we go. Stretch this guy out a bit. Put this guy here and this guy here. So it's not super noticeable there, but can actually decrease the darkness and totally mess with. No, that's not what I wanted at all. That was one of the bugs I don't think that ever got fixed before they shut down. If you turn this down too far, it gets too dark and you can't turn it back up correctly anymore. Now it gets too light. Ugh. Everything will be sand if it's all white. So it's not even really necessary that I have all this noise here because it barely blends. I'd have to actually, I'm not sure what I'd have to do to get it to read all this black out here. The black is probably too light. Really what it's doing is it's checking the whole picture for the darkest and the lightest, and so I've got it checking between black and 128. So I wonder if I change this to a lighter gray, if it will read it better, but that'll be some more experimenting for me to do. Back into my effects toolbox, do a couple blur passes on this one. Bye-bye. One more blur. Bye-bye. And let's get out of here. Now it's going to blur the edges of these inner squares, which I don't think is that important because you can cut those out. Doesn't look amazing with the blur. It doesn't look much different. It's pretty much the same now that I'm looking at it up close. A little bit more fuzz, which I guess I could maybe see with this. Yeah, see the grass. Pretty much the same. There's more green there, a little bit less green because there's more jagged changes in between the light and dark. It's also interesting that let me grab the original one here. If I tick this height box here, it's going to look crazy, but you can also do a pseudo 3D render, not even 3D, it's that's a 45 degree. Let's try isometric. You can see the effect better sometimes. Gives me kind of a raised effect if it's isometric, and it's actually increased the lower the value, so that'll bump it up by every single little grainy value in the noise, which I don't really want. So put it more at 4. Still kind of does that. Sometimes it reruns the render process. It's another bug that they never really kicked out of it. It'll just do it several times. But you can see it's got some depth to it, and if it was smoother, actually, use the blurred ones, you get these smoother ridges. That's a better reason for me to blur those, because if I wanted to do this pseudo 3D effect, I can actually blur it out. It's supposed to let you just isolate the height part, but there's also a bug that renders this ugly edge, and I haven't figured out how to get rid of the edge. It used to work. There was an update 2014, 2015 that I think messed it up, and I'm not really sure how to fix it, but that's not what I want. There is a way to create a mask to mask this out, but it's not something I want to do right now. You can also add a side texture, which doesn't always work either. Sometimes it puts the texture there, sometimes it doesn't. I haven't figured out why it doesn't, but I want to change my transparent color back to teal. It'll do a side sometimes if a transparent color is on, but it's not. I don't know why it's not doing it. Very strange. So that's another unfortunate aspect of using abandonware or working with abandoned tools is not everything works the way it's supposed to or the way it used to. And I'm finding as I'm moving from old computers to newer computers over the years, there's certain things that sometimes don't work right and some things that have messed up a little bit. But what I need to do is get those old computers working again so I can continue to do this without issue. But the problem is they will never fix any of the long-standing bugs because they don't exist anymore. Their company's gone. It's unfortunate, but there's nothing to be done about it. I have to work with what I've got, and in a lot of cases it does have this annoying problem where the more I work in this world, or the world viewer, the more I work in this window, it starts to hang up. I guess it starts to eat up more and more memory. There's some kind of memory leak that they never patched, and so eventually things start getting slower and slower and slower, and I have to restart. But the features, the benefits of working with the software are so much more than the annoyances. So I love to pretend that they're not there, but they don't actually implement, or they don't affect my workflow. They don't seem to hinder my abilities. It just takes about 5 seconds to restart. But I do like to dream about all the things that they could have fixed if they hadn't disappeared when they did. This doesn't look like it's tiling for some reason. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is, and I'm just being dumb. Oh, I think the blurring did something. Maybe. No. Yeah, sure did. Well, that's a peek at two of the programs that I use pretty regularly. These are probably the ones that I'm going to show off the most, because I do the most work in these two programs. There's always something to show with these programs. Neither of them are available anymore, but I love to show what they're capable of, in case anybody out there might want to recreate or create some kind of utilities that do some of the things that these programs do, because I'm not a programmer. I probably never will be, but these features, they might not be incredibly useful for a lot of AAA games and stuff, but they're really great for quick prototyping 2D jobs, blending textures together, doing these cool little isometric tiles and rotations, and I don't know, it's become a part of my daily workflow. Every time I'm working on a game, every time I'm working on one of my projects, I probably got one or both of these programs open in the background. There's a few others that I do throw open a lot, like Genetica, and there's more than that. I've got a whole pile of different tools that I use, but you can get a lot of free ones from my website at screamingbrainstudios.com. If you go to the tools section, there's a whole bunch of different utilities, and most of them are free. There's a couple that you can buy, Photoshop and Sprite. Some of these are really affordable. Sprite's probably $10, maybe $20. It's been a while since I bought it, but you can get it pretty cheap. The rest of these are free. There are a lot of things like texture creation tools, stuff for creating terrain, random generation of planet surfaces, 3D modeling tools. There's other utilities, stuff to rename files and make stuff out of gradients. It's just, I'm trying to compile all the useful free tools I can find into one place. So if you guys have any suggestions for any, or if you use any regularly that are free, or if you are the creator of any free tools, just let me know. I can add them to this page so other people can find it. I think I might cut this short. I've got to get some stuff done here at my day job, or my night job. But I hope you guys enjoy watching some of this weird software behind the scenes work on some of these old school graphics and testing them out in an actual video game that I'm trying to put together. It's not really don't know, it's not really solid on paper yet, but it's a fun experiment, and I hope you guys like watching it. Thank you guys. Catch you later.